The storm had come without warning, like God's own fury unleashed upon the Georgia countryside. Lightning split the midnight sky as William Anderson knelt on the worn kitchen floor, his weathered hands trembling as they cradled Stella's heaving body, the German shepherd's eyes, wide with pain and trust, locked onto his. "Just you and me now, girl," Bill whispered, his voice barely audible above the thunder that rattled the farmhouse windows. "We're both alone in this world." Rain lashed against the glass like angry fingers demanding entry. 3 years a widower. Bill had forgotten what it meant to care whether he lived or died until tonight, when this dog his daughter had forced upon him 6 weeks ago had started her laboring. Another contraction seized Stella. Bill wiped sweat from his brow with a forearm, wondering if he remembered enough from the hundreds of births he'd overseen in another lifetime. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the kitchen in stark white. In that frozen moment, Bill saw it, the first puppy emerging, slick and dark. As he cleared its mouth and nose with practiced fingers, the puppy took its first breath. Bill stared down at the tiny form, recognition dawning like a physical blow to his chest, the distinct white markings, the unusual pattern across its face identical to Scout, his very first rescue dog from 30 years ago. "My God," he whispered, as thunder answered his blasphemy. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. William Bill Anderson had not always been a shadow of a man. At 63, the Vietnam veteran still stood tall, though grief had carved deep lines into his sun-weathered face and dulled the blue eyes that once sparkled with purpose. The sprawling 50-acre farm in Willow Creek, Georgia, had been his and Martha's dream, a sanctuary for unwanted and abused dogs they'd run together for over 25 years until tragedy struck. Now, the once immaculate white farmhouse peeled in the southern sun, its wraparound porch sagging like the shoulders of its owner. Behind the house, rows of empty kennels stood as silent monuments to a past life, their gates rusted open, weeds pushing through concrete floors where paws once pattered. The fields beyond lay fallow, as neglected as Bill's own heart since Martha's passing 3 years ago. The neighbors in their small rural community had stopped checking on him months ago. Sometimes weeks would pass without Bill speaking to another living soul. The only regular human voice he heard was from Pastor Mike, who left increasingly concerned messages on the answering machine. Bill rarely checked. Martha's presence still dominated the house, her quilts draped over furniture, her cookbooks gathering dust in the kitchen where they'd shared thousands of meals. The bedroom upstairs remained exactly as she had left it the morning before her heart gave out. While tending to a rescue retriever and her puppies, Bill slept on the couch now, unable to face the empty side of their bed, when Rebecca, his only daughter, had appeared on his doorstep 6 weeks earlier. Bill had barely recognized her. Their relationship had fractured after Martha's funeral, when Rebecca begged him not to abandon the rescue operation, and Bill, drowning in grief, had accused her of caring more about the dogs than her own mother's memory. They hadn't spoken since that bitter winter day, but there she stood, a leash in her hand connected to a beautiful German shepherd. "Her name is Stella," Rebecca had said, her voice tight with determination. "The shelter was going to put her down. She needs you, Dad." "And you need her?" Before Bill could form a proper argument, Rebecca was gone, leaving only a bag of dog food and an animal looking up at him with intelligent eyes that seemed to see straight through to his broken soul. He'd been too tired, too empty to drive the dog to the shelter himself. So Stella stayed. Bill hadn't intended to keep Stella beyond a day or two. He'd planned to call Rebecca and demand she take back the responsibility she'd foisted upon him, but something in the dog's quiet dignity stopped him. Stella didn't beg for attention like some dogs. She simply existed alongside him, a silent companion in his grief. The first night, she'd slept by the front door, as if expecting Rebecca to return. By the third night, she'd moved to the floor beside the couch where Bill slept. By the end of the first week, Bill found himself talking to her small things at first. Comments about the weather or complaints about his arthritic knee. It had been so long since he'd used his voice for more than grunting at the cashier at Johnson's General Store that the sound of it startled him. "Martha would have loved you," he told Stella one evening as they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the overgrown fields. She always had a thing for German shepherds. The memory came unbidden. Martha at 35, hair still chestnut brown, kneeling beside their first rescue dog, a half-starved shepherd mix they'd found tied to a tree on an abandoned property. "This one's special, Bill," she'd said, her voice certain. "This one's going to change everything." She'd been right. Scout had been the beginning of Willow Creek Canine Sanctuary. Within 5 years, they'd built the kennels behind the house, converted the old barn into a rehabilitation center, and become known throughout 3 counties as the place to bring dogs that needed saving. For 25 years. They'd rarely had fewer than 15 dogs on the property. Bill had built each kennel himself. Martha had sewn the bedding. And together they'd healed the broken bodies and spirits of nearly 1,000 dogs. Many they'd rehomed with carefully vetted families. Some, the ones too old or damaged for adoption, had lived out their days on the farm, surrounded by love. That had been before the fire. Bill pushed himself up from the porch rocker, unwilling to revisit that particular nightmare. "Come on, girl," he called to Stella, who followed him inside with quiet steps. It was Rebecca who noticed Stella's condition first. 2 weeks after dropping off the dog, she'd called the first contact since that day. "How's Stella doing?" she'd asked without preamble. "Fine," Bill had answered, the word clipped. "Has she started showing yet?" "Showing what?" Rebecca's sigh had hummed through the phone line. "She's pregnant. Dad, the shelter said she was already carrying when they took her in. That's why I brought her to you. They were going to, well, you know what they do." Bill had looked at Stella, really looked at her for the first time. The slight swelling of her abdomen, the fullness around her face. How had he missed it? "I don't know anything about whelping anymore," he'd said, panic rising. "It's been years since—" "You'll remember," Rebecca had interrupted. "It's like riding a bike." After hanging up, Bill had stared at Stella for a long time. "Well," he'd finally said, "seems like you've got secrets too." The next day, he'd driven to town for the first time in months, ignoring the curious stares as he loaded his truck with supplies, whelping pads, puppy formula just in case, a heat lamp, and a shallow kiddie pool that would serve as a whelping box. The clerk at the farm supply store, young Jimmy Patterson, whose father had bought puppies from the sanctuary years ago, had raised his eyebrows but asked no questions. News traveled fast in Willow Creek. By nightfall, Bill's answering machine had 3 messages, one from Pastor Mike expressing delight that Bill was getting back in the saddle, one from Dr. Sarah Johnson offering her veterinary services like old times, and one from Frank Carter, his nearest neighbor, whose property bordered the north section of Bill's land. Frank's message had been terse. "Heard you're taking in dogs again. Just remember our agreement after the last incident. No dogs on the north field. I mean it. Anderson." Bill deleted all 3 messages. Frank Carter had never forgiven him for what happened 12 years ago when one of the sanctuary dogs, a traumatized German shepherd, ironically enough, had escaped and frightened Frank's daughter. The fact that the dog had never actually touched the girl didn't matter to Frank. The fact that Frank had subsequently shot at the dog, missing it, but nearly hitting one of Bill's volunteers, had created a rift between the neighbors that Martha had never been able to heal. As Stella's pregnancy progressed, Bill found himself falling into old routines. He cleaned out one of the smaller kennels nearest the house, fixed the broken hinges on the gate, and spent an afternoon scrubbing years of dust and cobwebs from the concrete floor. He caught himself whistling as he worked a habit he'd thought long buried with Martha. At night, he found himself talking more to Stella, sharing memories of the sanctuary's glory days. Sometimes, in the telling, he could almost hear Martha's laugh, could almost feel her presence beside him. Just one litter, he told Stella firmly as her due date approached. Then we find homes for the puppies, and that's it. I'm not running a rescue anymore. But even as he said it, Bill felt something stirring inside him, something he hadn't felt in 3 years. Purpose. The storm had been brewing all day, dark clouds gathering over the Georgia pines like mourners at a funeral. Bill had felt it in his bad knee, the one that still held shrapnel from Vietnam, and in the restlessness of Stella, who paced the kitchen with increasing anxiety as evening approached. "Easy, girl," he murmured, watching her circle the whelping box he'd prepared in the kitchen corner. "Everything's going to be fine." But Bill wasn't certain of that at all. It had been nearly a decade since he'd helped deliver puppies, and even then, Martha had always taken the lead, her hands steadier, her instincts sharper. He'd called Dr. Sarah earlier that afternoon when he noticed Stella's temperature dropping, a sure sign labor would begin within 24 hours, but she was handling an emergency at a farm 30 miles away. "I'll get there as soon as I can, Bill," she'd promised, the connection crackling with the approaching storm. "But it sounds like Stella might not wait. You remember what to do?" It wasn't a question, but Bill had answered anyway. "I remember." The truth was, he remembered too much and not enough all at once. The mechanics of whelping, yes, the need for clean towels, for warmth, for careful monitoring of mother and puppies, but he'd forgotten how to be calm in a crisis, how to believe things would turn out right. The last time he'd delivered puppies without Martha had been the night of the fire, and those memories were tangled with smoke and screams and loss. The first flash of lightning came just after 9, followed by a boom of thunder that rattled the windows. Stella whined and pressed against Bill's legs as he stood at the sink, washing his hands for what felt like the 100th time. "It's just a storm," he told her, though his own heart raced. The weather forecast had predicted severe thunderstorms with potential for tornadic activity. Bill had lived in Georgia long enough to know how quickly such storms could turn deadly. When Stella's contractions began in earnest around 10, Bill called Rebecca. She didn't answer, probably at the hospital where she worked night shifts as a nurse, so he left a message, trying to keep the edge of panic from his voice. "Stella's in labor. Storm's bad. We're fine. But—" He paused, suddenly unsure why he'd called at all. "Just thought you should know." By 11, the storm had intensified to a fury that made the old farmhouse creak and groan. Rain hammered the roof. Wind howled around the eaves, and Stella panted heavily in her whelping box, her eyes wide with what Bill recognized as fear. "I know, girl," he said, stroking her head. "I don't like storms either, not anymore. Not since the night Martha died." The storm then had been like this, one violent, unceasing, She'd gone to check on a mother dog and puppies in the barn. Despite Bill's protests, when lightning struck a nearby tree and part of the barn roof collapsed, Bill had run through torrential rain to find her. The doctors said the heart attack had likely been instant. She wouldn't have suffered, but Bill hadn't been with her. That was the thing he couldn't forgive himself for. She had died alone. A particularly strong contraction seized Stella, pulling Bill back to the present. Her body tensed, and he saw the first puppy emerging. "That's it, girl," he encouraged, his voice steadier than he felt. "Push now." The first puppy slid into the world as lightning flashed, illuminating its wet form. Bill quickly cleared its mouth and nose, rubbing it with a towel until a tiny squeak confirmed life. As he placed it near Stella's head for her inspection, he noticed the markings, the distinctive white patch over one eye, and the white socks on its front paws. His hands froze. The markings were identical to Scout's, the very first rescue dog he and Martha had saved. The dog that had started everything. It wasn't just similar, it was exact, down to the uneven edge of the eye patch that Martha had always said looked like a teardrop. "Impossible," Bill whispered. He had no time to dwell on it. The second puppy was coming, and this birth was more difficult. Stella strained, a low whine escaping her throat. Bill's training kicked in, and he gently helped guide the puppy, sighing with relief when it finally emerged. As he cleaned this one, a little female, he noticed she had a perfect ring of white around her neck, just like Daisy, the lab mix that had been Martha's constant shadow for 14 years. By the time the third puppy arrived, Bill was shaking, not from the effort of the delivery, but from the growing impossibility of what he was witnessing. This puppy, larger than the others, had the same distinctive pattern of spots along its side that had made Bandit, their old rescue pointer, so memorable. "This can't be happening," Bill said aloud, his voice nearly drowned by a crash of thunder so violent it made the lights flicker. The storm reached its peak as Stella delivered the fourth and fifth puppies in quick succession, one with the unique half-folded ear like Rex, the Belgian Malinois that had saved a lost child in the woods behind the property years ago. Another with the unusual brindle pattern of Hunter, the mixed breed that had been Bill's faithful hunting companion until old age took him. The sixth puppy arrived during a brief lull in the storm, almost as if nature itself paused to witness its birth. This puppy was smaller than the others, with a coat so light it was almost white, except for a gray patch on its chest in the shape of a crescent moon. Bill's breath caught in his throat. Liberty, Martha's favorite of all their rescues. A dog so gentle she'd been used as a therapy dog at the local nursing home. Her distinctive moon-shaped marking had made her instantly recognizable. Bill's hands trembled as he cleaned the tiny puppy, which seemed weaker than its siblings. "Come on, little one," he urged, rubbing more vigorously until at last it gave a feeble cry. The final puppy came as the storm began to subside. Dawn breaking through the clouds. This one was the most striking of all, a perfect blend of colors that mirrored hope. The German Shepherd mix that had been the last dog Martha had rescued before her death, the one that had been in the barn with her that terrible night. As Stella began cleaning her puppies, nudging them toward her teats to nurse, Bill sat back on his heels, exhausted and bewildered. 7 puppies, 7 perfect matches for the most significant dogs of his and Martha's life together. He must be imagining it. The lack of sleep, the emotional strain of the delivery, the storm's eerie resonance with the night Martha died. All of it had combined to play tricks on his mind. There had to be a logical explanation. Yet as morning light strengthened through the windows, the markings remained unchanged. 7 puppies, 7 ghosts from his past, The phone rang, startling Bill from his trance. It was Dr. Sarah. "Bill, I'm on my way. Roads are a mess after the storm, but I should be there in 20 minutes. How's Stella? Did she deliver yet?" Bill stared at the puppies, all nursing contentedly now. "She did," he said, his voice hoarse. 7 puppies, all healthy. 7. That's wonderful. Bill, I always said you had the magic touch with whelping." He nearly told her then about the markings, about the impossible coincidence, but something stopped him. Would she think he'd lost his mind, or worse? Would she have some clinical explanation that would strip the moment of its wonder? "You might want to hurry, Sarah," he said instead. "There's something you need to see." After hanging up, Bill sank into a kitchen chair, eyes fixed on Stella and her puppies. For the first time in 3 years, he felt fully awake, as if he'd been sleepwalking through life and had suddenly jerked into consciousness. "Martha," he whispered to the empty kitchen. "Is this you? Is this what you've sent me?" Only the gentle snuffling of puppies answered him, but somehow it felt like enough. Dr. Sarah Johnson had been the veterinarian for Willow Creek Canine Sanctuary for over 20 years before it closed, at 58, her auburn hair now streaked with silver. She still maintained the same calm efficiency that had made her Martha's closest friend. When she arrived at Bill's farm that morning, mud splattered to her knees from navigating the storm-ruined driveway. Bill realized how much he'd missed her steady presence. "Well, look at you, being a midwife at your age," she teased as she stepped into the kitchen, setting down her medical bag. Then her eyes fell on Stella and her puppies, and the smile slipped from her face. "My God, Bill." She knelt beside the whelping box, examining each puppy in turn, her professional demeanor giving way to open astonishment. "This is remarkable," she finally said, looking up at Bill with wide eyes. "These markings, they're just like—" "I know," Bill interrupted, relieved that someone else could see it too. "Scout, Daisy, Bandit, Rex, Hunter, Liberty, and Hope, exactly like them." Sarah sat back on her heels, shaking her head. "The statistical probability of this happening naturally is, well, astronomical, so I'm not crazy." "No, Bill, you're not crazy." Sarah reached out to stroke Stella's head. "But there's got to be an explanation. Genetics can produce strange coincidences sometimes." Bill wasn't convinced. 7 coincidences all in one litter. Sarah had no answer for that. She completed her examination of Stella and the puppies in silence, pronouncing them all healthy except for the smallest one, the Liberty look-alike, which she said would need extra attention. "This little girl might need supplemental feeding," she explained, demonstrating how to tube feed the tiny puppy if necessary. Before leaving, Sarah paused at the door. "Martha would have seen this as a sign, you know." Bill nodded. Martha had always believed in signs and wonders in a way his more practical mind resisted. "What do you think it means?" Sarah's smile was gentle. "I think it means it's time for William Anderson to rejoin the land of the living." After she left, Bill called Rebecca, who arrived within the hour, her hospital scrub still on, dark circles under her eyes from her night shift. "Oh, my God, Dad," she whispered as she knelt beside the puppies. "They look just like—" "I know," Bill said for the second time that morning. Rebecca picked up the smallest puppy, cradling it against her chest. "This one's like Liberty. Remember how Mom used to say Liberty had an old soul in a young body? You were 12 when we got Liberty. Bill remembered aloud. You used to dress her up in your doll clothes. Rebecca laughed, a sound Bill hadn't heard in far too long. And she'd just sit there, patient as a saint, letting me put bonnets on her head. For a moment, they sat in companionable silence, united in memory, in a way they hadn't been since Martha's death. Then Rebecca looked around the kitchen at the unwashed dishes piled in the sink, the layer of dust on the windowsills, the cobwebs in the corners. Dad, this place, Bill followed her gaze, seeing his home through her eyes. I know it's not what it used to be. No, it's not. Rebecca's tone was firm, but not unkind. And neither are you. The man my mother loved wouldn't live like this. The man who built the sanctuary wouldn't have let it fall to ruin. Bill felt a flare of the old anger. Your mother was the heart of this place. Without her, you're still you. Rebecca cut in. A good man with a gift for healing broken things. She gestured to Stella and her puppies. Look what's happened. Dad, if this isn't a second chance, I don't know what is. Before Bill could respond, the sound of tires on gravel announced another visitor through the kitchen window. Bill saw Frank Carter's mud-splattered pickup truck pull up. Frank stepped out. His tall frame stooped now with age, his perpetual scowl deeper than ever. Stay here, Bill told Rebecca, moving to intercept Frank before he reached the house. The two men faced each other in the yard, the morning sun casting long shadows across the mud-churned ground. Frank spoke first, his voice as hard as Bill remembered. Heard from Jim Patterson at the feed store that you bought whelping supplies. Then Sarah Johnson's car was here this morning. Frank's eyes narrowed. You starting up the rescue again? Anderson. Bill considered lying, then decided against it. No, just one dog and her puppies. That's how it started last time. One dog, then a dozen, then 30 running loose, coming onto my property, frightening my livestock. That happened once. Frank, once in 25 years. Once was enough. Frank's jaw tightened. My girl still has nightmares about that shepherd chasing her. That dog never touched Melissa, and you know it, Bill said, feeling the old frustration rise. She was a rescue. Barely healed from abuse. She got loose and ran because your daughter startled her with that air horn you gave her. Don't you blame my child. Frank took a step forward, his finger jabbing the air. And don't think I've forgotten that your precious dogs cost me my best hunting hound. Got into a fight with one of your rescues and had to be put down. Your hound was on our property. Frank, if you'd kept him leashed. Dad. Rebecca appeared on the porch, her expression concerned. Everything okay out here? Frank glanced at her, then back at Bill. Just making sure your daddy remembers our agreement. No dogs on the north field. And if I see or hear any dogs threatening my property, I won't hesitate to protect what's mine. With that parting shot, he turned and strode back to his truck. Bill watched him drive away, mud spraying from the tires. Some grudges never die, he muttered. What was that about? Rebecca asked as they returned to the kitchen. Bill explained the history with Frank as he checked on Stella and her puppies. The smallest one was nursing, which was a good sign. He threatened the dogs. Rebecca's voice rose in indignation. Frank's all talk, Bill assured her, though he wasn't entirely convinced. The man had changed since his wife left him 5 years ago, becoming more bitter, more isolated, a transformation Bill recognized all too well over the next few days, as news of Stella's unusual litter spread through Willow Creek. Bill experienced something he hadn't expected: community interest. Pastor Mike stopped by with a casserole and stayed to admire the puppies. Jim Patterson from the feed store brought a donation of puppy chow on the house. Even Mrs. Grayson, who taught at the elementary school, asked if she could bring some of her students to see the puppies when they were a bit older. People have missed this place, Rebecca observed one evening as she helped Bill clean out another of the old kennels. She had taken to spending her days off at the farm, slowly coaxing her father back into a relationship that had been fractured by grief. Martha was the one they connected with, Bill said, sweeping decades of dust into a pile. She had a way with people, not just dogs. So do you, when you try. Rebecca leaned on her broom. You know, there's been talk in town about the county shelter closing, budget cuts. They're going to start euthanizing more dogs if they can't find placement. Bill stopped sweeping. What are you suggesting? Nothing, Rebecca said too quickly. Just thinking out loud. But the seed had been planted. That night, after Rebecca left, Bill sat on the porch with Stella at his feet, her puppies safely sleeping in their box inside, and allowed himself to consider a possibility he'd shut out for 3 years, reopening the sanctuary. Martha would want it. He knew that with bone-deep certainty the sanctuary had been her life's work, her passion, in the darkest days after her death. He'd convinced himself that closing it was honoring her memory, somehow preserving it exactly as she'd left it. But sitting there under a sky jeweled with stars, Bill recognized the self-deception in that thinking. Martha would have hated seeing the kennels empty, the fields unused. She would have seen it as a waste of potential good, a squandering of their life's purpose. What do you think, Stella? He asked the dog, who lifted her head and looked at him with intelligent eyes. Could we do it again? Could I do it without her? The next morning, Bill rose early with a sense of determination he hadn't felt in years, after checking on Stella and her puppies, all thriving now. Even the smallest one, he walked the property, really seeing it for the first time since Martha's death. The kennels would need work new gates, fresh concrete in places, proper drainage systems reinstalled. The barn was still structurally sound despite the partial roof collapse that had been repaired after Martha's death. The fences around the exercise yards were sagging but fixable. It would take money, work, and time, but it could be done. The question was whether it should be done. Bill was 63. With an arthritic knee and a heart that had been broken and poorly mended. Did he have the energy, the will, to start again? As if in answer, his cell phone rang. It was Dr. Sarah. Bill, I've got a situation, she said without preamble. County Shelter just brought in a German Shepherd mix. Hit by a car, broken leg, some internal bruising. But she'll recover with proper care. The problem is, the shelter's already over capacity. They're talking euthanasia if I can't find placement by tomorrow. Bill hesitated, the weight of decision pressing on him. I know it's a lot to ask, Sarah continued, but this dog, Bill, she reminds me of the ones you and Martha used to save, the ones everyone else gave up on. Before he could talk himself out of it, Bill heard himself say, "Bring her here." There was a pause, then Sarah's voice, thick with emotion. Really? Just this one? Bill cautioned. I'm not promising anything more. But they both knew it was a beginning. The injured shepherd, a 2-year-old female Sarah had named Grace, arrived that afternoon. Bill converted one of the smaller kennels into a recovery space, laying down fresh bedding and setting up the heat lamps they'd once used for sick or injured rescues. As he knelt beside Grace, gently examining the cast on her leg, he felt a familiar sense of purpose settling over him. This was what he knew how to do: heal the broken, offer refuge to the abandoned. Rebecca arrived just as Bill was finishing Grace's setup. She stood in the doorway of the kennel, watching her father work with a look of surprised approval. "So," she said, "it begins again." Bill straightened, wincing as his knee protested. "It's just one dog," Rebecca smiled. "That's what you said about Stella." The days that followed took on a rhythm Bill had thought lost forever. Mornings began with caring for Stella's puppies, which were growing rapidly, their eyes open now, their personalities emerging. The Scout look-alike was bold and curious, the Daisy double was gentle and sweet, the Bandit twin was mischievous, always escaping the whelping box. The Rex copy had an unusual intelligence in its eyes. The Hunter mimic was active and athletic. The Hope replica was protective of its siblings. And the Liberty look-alike, though still the smallest, had a quiet determination that reminded Bill painfully of Martha. Afternoons were spent rehabilitating Grace and continuing the kennel renovations. To Bill's surprise, help arrived unbidden. Pastor Mike brought 3 men from his congregation to help replace rotted wood. Jim Patterson's teenage sons came to paint. Even Dr. Sarah spent her day off helping Bill reinstall the water lines to the kennels. "Word's getting around," Sarah told him as they worked. "People are saying Willow Creek Canine Sanctuary might be coming back to life." "I haven't decided anything," Bill insisted, though with each passing day, the decision seemed to be making itself. The only dark cloud was Frank Carter, who made a point of driving slowly past the property each day, watching the activity with obvious disapproval. Twice Bill spotted him standing at the fence line that separated their properties, staring at the kennels with an expression that sent a chill through Bill's spine. Then came the town council meeting. Rebecca called Bill afterward, her voice tight with anger. "Frank Carter is trying to get the zoning board to revoke the sanctuary's permit," she reported. "He's saying it lapsed when you stopped operations, and that the property has reverted to residential agricultural only." Bill had been expecting something like this. "What did the council say?" "They're divided. Some members remember how much good the sanctuary did for the community, the school programs, the therapy dog visits, the jobs it created, but others are worried about noise, traffic, the liability if a dog got loose." It was the same battle Bill and Martha had fought when they first opened the sanctuary. Some things never changed. "There's going to be a public hearing next month," Rebecca continued. "You'll need to make your case if you want to reopen officially." "I haven't said I'm reopening," Bill reminded her. Rebecca's sigh was audible through the phone. "Dad, you've got 8 dogs on the property now. 8 dogs, Stella, her 7 puppies, and Grace." It had happened so naturally that Bill barely registered the change. From one reluctantly accepted German shepherd to 8 souls depending on him. Martha would have laughed at how easily he'd slipped back into the role she'd always said he was born for. That evening, as a soft rain fell on the metal roof of the farmhouse, Bill sat on the living room floor surrounded by puppies. They were 3 weeks old now, wobbling around on unsteady legs, exploring their expanding world with boundless curiosity. The smallest one, the one with Liberty's crescent moon marking, climbed into his lap and promptly fell asleep. Bill stroked its tiny head with one finger, marveling at the perfect recreation of Liberty's marking. He remembered Martha's voice the day they'd found Liberty abandoned in a cardboard box outside the local Walmart. "Some dogs come into your life for a reason, Bill. This one's special. I can feel it." Looking around at the puppies, at Stella, watching protectively from her bed. At Grace, sleeping in her crate in the corner, Bill felt something he hadn't experienced since Martha's death, a sense of rightness, of being exactly where he was meant to be. "Okay, Martha," he whispered to the quiet room. "I hear you now." The decision, once made, brought with it a clarity that cut through 3 years of fog. The next morning, Bill called Rebecca. "I'm reopening the sanctuary," he said without preamble. "If Frank Carter wants a fight, he's got one." Rebecca's whoop of joy made him smile, the first genuine smile in longer than he could remember. "I'll help," she promised. "And I know others will too." She was right. When word spread that Willow Creek Canine Sanctuary was officially coming back, the community rallied in ways Bill hadn't anticipated. A local contractor offered discounted materials for the barn renovation. The high school shop class volunteered to build new dog houses as a project. A lawyer in town offered pro bono help with the zoning battle. Not everyone was supportive. There were concerns, questions, and outright opposition from some quarters. Frank Carter was gathering his own allies, particularly among the farmers who worried about dogs affecting their livestock. But for every voice raised against the sanctuary, 3 more spoke in its favor. People remembered the good it had done not just for the dogs, but for the community. They remembered the reading program where children practiced by reading to rescue dogs, building confidence without fear of judgment. They remembered the therapy dogs that visited nursing homes and hospitals. They remembered how Martha had always found time to help a neighbor in need, human or canine. As the weeks passed and the puppies grew, Bill found himself thinking more and more about names. He had resisted naming them, referring to them only by their markings, the Scout one or the Liberty one. Naming them would make them real, would cement his commitment to them and to the path he was choosing. One evening, as the puppies played in the fenced area he'd built off the porch, Rebecca broached the subject. "They need names, Dad," she said, watching the Liberty look-alike tumble with her larger siblings. "We can't keep calling them by the dogs they resemble." "I know," Bill admitted. "I've been thinking about it." Rebecca picked up the smallest puppy, holding her at eye level. "This one," she said decisively, "should be Faith." "Faith," Bill repeated, considering it, not Liberty, but Faith, similar yet different, a connection to the past but not a replacement, because that's what she represents. Rebecca explained, "Faith that things can get better, faith that life goes on." Bill looked at his daughter, really looked at her for the first time in years, and saw Martha in the determined set of her jaw, in the compassionate gleam of her eyes. How had he failed to notice before? Faith. He agreed, reaching out to stroke the puppy's head. "It fits." One by one, they named the puppies not after the dogs they resembled, but with names that represented new beginnings. Hope, chance, blessing, miracle, promise, and joy. Only the Scout look-alike gave Bill pause. "This one," he said finally, picking up the bold puppy with the white patch over one eye. "This one is Pioneer, because he's leading us into new territory." Rebecca's smile was like sunrise after a long night. Mom would approve. As they sat there in the gathering dusk, surrounded by new life and new possibilities, Bill felt Martha's absence not as a void, but as a foundation, the solid ground upon which he was building something new. The sanctuary would never be what it was before, but perhaps it could be something equally valuable, equally needed. The sound of a vehicle pulling into the driveway interrupted his thoughts. Through the twilight, Bill recognized Dr. Sarah's car. She hurried toward them, her face tense. "Bill," she called as she approached. "We've got trouble. Frank Carter just convinced the county to send animal control officers to inspect the property tomorrow. He's claiming you're running an illegal operation." Bill felt a flare of anger, quickly replaced by determination. "Let them come. We have nothing to hide." "It's not that simple," Sarah said, sinking onto the porch step. "Frank's got influence with the county commissioners. If he pushes hard enough, they could shut you down before the zoning hearing." Rebecca stood up, the puppy named Faith cradled protectively in her arms. "We won't let that happen." Bill looked from his daughter to Sarah, then to the puppies playing innocently at his feet. 7 small lives that had somehow awakened him from a 3-year slumber. 7 miracles that had given him back his purpose. "No," he agreed, feeling a strength in his voice that had long been absent. "We won't let that happen." The battle for Willow Creek Canine Sanctuary had truly begun. The morning of the animal control inspection dawned with threatening skies, dark clouds hanging low. Pregnant with rain that had yet to fall, Bill had been up since 4. Unable to sleep with the weight of the day ahead pressing on him, he'd spent the hours cleaning every corner of the kennels, checking fence lines, organizing the medication cabinet that Sarah had helped him restock, and reviewing the meticulous records he'd begun keeping since Grace's arrival. By 7, Rebecca arrived with coffee and determination etched on her face. She'd taken the day off from the hospital to stand alongside her father. "You look like hell," she observed. Handing him a steaming cup, Bill grunted. "Couldn't sleep." "Everything's going to be fine, Dad. We're not doing anything wrong." Bill wasn't so sure. Frank Carter had connections throughout the county. His brother-in-law sat on the board of commissioners. His cousin worked in the permit office. Small-town politics could be as treacherous as quicksand. And Bill had been absent from the game for 3 years. "I called Pastor Mike last night," Rebecca continued, following Bill as he made his morning rounds checking on the dogs. "He's coming by with some of the congregation. Said they want to show support. This isn't a church social, Beck. It's an inspection." "It's a show of force," she corrected. "The inspectors need to see that the community stands behind this place." At 9 o'clock sharp, 2 county vehicles pulled into the driveway, followed closely by Frank Carter's mud-splattered truck. Bill stood on the porch, shoulders squared, as a heavy-set man in a county uniform approached. His nameplate read, R. Dawson, Mr. Anderson Robert Dawson, County Animal Control. "We're here for the inspection." "Of course," Bill said, extending his hand. "We've been expecting you." Dawson's handshake was firm but not hostile. "This is my colleague, Lisa Chen. We understand you're operating a rescue facility." Before Bill could answer, Frank Carter strode up, his tall frame rigid with purpose. "He's running an illegal kennel," Frank declared. "No permit, no proper facilities, and a history of dangerous dogs escaping." Dawson turned to Frank with a look of professional patience. "Mr. Carter, we appreciate your concern as a neighbor, but we'll need to conduct our inspection first before making any determinations." Frank's face darkened. "Just making sure you have all the facts. Dawson, that dog attack on my property 10 years ago." "It wasn't an attack," Bill cut in, feeling the old anger rising. "Your daughter was never touched, and that dog was recovering from severe abuse." Frank stepped closer, finger jabbing the air between them. "My daughter was traumatized, and your dogs have been a menace to this community for years." "That's enough," Dawson said firmly. "Mr. Carter, You can wait in your vehicle if you'd like to stay, but the inspection needs to proceed without interference." Frank glared at Bill before stalking back to his truck, slamming the door with enough force to startle Stella, who had been watching the proceedings from behind Bill's legs. The inspection began methodically. Dawson and Chen toured the kennels, checked the fencing, examined the medical records, and observed the interaction between Bill and the dogs. Chen seemed particularly taken with Stella's puppies, now 4 weeks old and bundles of energy. "They're remarkable," she said, kneeling to let them crawl over her. "These markings are so distinctive." Bill watched nervously as Dawson made notes on his clipboard, his expression unreadable. Rebecca stood nearby, jumping in occasionally to explain improvements they were planning or to highlight safety features Martha had installed years ago. Midway through the inspection, cars began arriving, first Pastor Mike's sedan, then Jim Patterson's truck, followed by a stream of vehicles that parked along the roadside. People Bill hadn't seen in years stepped onto his property, nodding greetings as they gathered near the old barn. "What's this?" Dawson asked, looking up from his clipboard. "Looks like you've got an audience," Rebecca said with a hint of satisfaction. By the time Dawson and Chen reached the barn, the final stop on their tour, nearly 30 people had assembled. Bill recognized faces from church, from the feed store, from the school where Martha had taken therapy dogs. They stood quietly, a silent testament to the sanctuary's place in the community. Pastor Mike stepped forward. "Mr. Dawson, we understand you're just doing your job, but we wanted to be here today to show our support for Willow Creek Sanctuary. This place has been a blessing to our community for decades." Mrs. Grayson, the elementary school teacher, added her voice. "The children at my school benefited tremendously from the reading program with the rescue dogs. Since the sanctuary closed, our struggling readers have had fewer resources." One by one, community members spoke up. The nursing home director, who recalled how the therapy dogs had brought joy to isolated seniors, the veteran who'd found healing working with traumatized animals, the family whose beloved pet had been a Willow Creek rescue. Frank Carter remained in his truck, watching the gathering with narrowed eyes. Dawson listened to each testimony, his expression softening slightly. When the impromptu community meeting concluded, he pulled Bill aside. "Mr. Anderson, I'll be straight with you. Your facilities are in decent shape, especially considering how long they were inactive, but there are code issues that need addressing before you can be fully operational." Bill's heart sank. "What kind of issues?" "The drainage system in kennels 3 through 6 needs updating to current standards. The quarantine area needs a separate ventilation system, and you'll need to install the new style of safety gates at all exits." "Those are fixable," Rebecca interjected. Having moved close enough to overhear, Dawson nodded. "They are, but they'll cost money. And until they're addressed, I can't approve you for more than the dogs you currently have." "And the zoning issue?" Bill asked. "That's beyond my purview," Dawson admitted. "That'll be decided at the hearing next month. But I will note in my report that the current operation is being run humanely and responsibly, if somewhat limited in scope due to the facility issues." It wasn't a victory, but it wasn't defeat either. As Dawson and Chen prepared to leave, Frank Carter approached them, his face thunderous. "That's it. You're letting him continue." "Mr. Carter," Dawson said, his voice taking on an edge of impatience. "As I explained, Mr. Anderson can maintain his current number of animals while addressing the facility upgrades. The zoning board will make the final determination about the sanctuary's future." Frank's gaze shifted to Bill. "This isn't over. Anderson." As the county vehicles pulled away, The gathered community members moved toward Bill, offering encouragement, promises of help with the renovations, and even some financial pledges. Pastor Mike handed Bill an envelope. "The congregation took up a collection," he explained. "It's not enough for all the upgrades, but it's a start." Bill stared at the envelope, emotion tightening his throat. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll let us help," Mrs. Grayson suggested. This sanctuary meant everything to Martha. It meant something to all of us, too. That evening, after the last well-wisher had departed, Bill sat at his kitchen table counting the donations and making lists of the needed repairs. Rebecca worked beside him, researching costs online. Stella lay at their feet, her puppies asleep in their box. "We're about $3,000 short for the minimum requirements," Rebecca calculated. Frowning at her laptop screen, Bill sighed, rubbing his eyes. "I can dip into my savings. Dad, you're already using your retirement money to feed and care for these dogs. There has to be another way." A sharp knock at the door interrupted them. Bill opened it to find Dr. Sarah, her expression urgent. "There's a storm warning," she said without preamble. "They're predicting severe thunderstorms with flash flooding overnight. It's going to be a bad one." Bill felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind now picking up outside. How bad? Potentially as bad as the one 3 years ago. The night Martha died. Bill glanced at the puppies, at Grace in her crate, and then out at the kennels, where 3 more dogs had been brought in yesterday, abandoned hunting hounds that Sarah couldn't place elsewhere. "The kennels," he said, suddenly remembering. "The drainage issues Dawson mentioned if we get heavy rain. The back kennels will flood." Rebecca was already on her feet. "We need to move the hounds to the front kennels or into the house, and secure everything in the barn," Bill added, the old emergency protocols coming back to him in a rush. "Anything that could blow around and cause damage needs to be stored or tied down." They worked frantically as the sky darkened prematurely, the air growing thick and electric. Sarah called volunteers from her clinic to help, and within an hour, 5 people were assisting with storm preparations. The hounds were relocated to the front kennels, which sat on higher ground. Equipment was secured, windows were shuttered, and emergency supplies were gathered. By the time the first heavy raindrops began to fall, they had done all they could. Bill sent the volunteers home, urging them to get to safety before the roads flooded. Only Rebecca and Sarah remained, refusing to leave. "I'm staying, Dad," Rebecca said firmly when Bill suggested she return to her apartment in town. "You can't handle this alone." The first crash of thunder made Stella whine anxiously. The puppies, disturbed from their sleep, began mewling. Bill knelt beside the whelping box, speaking softly to calm them. "It's all right," he murmured, though his own heart raced with memories of another storm, another night when the skies had opened and taken Martha from him. Everything's going to be fine. But as the evening progressed, the storm intensified beyond predictions. Rain hammered the roof with such violence that conversation became difficult. Wind howled around the eaves, finding every crack and crevice in the old farmhouse. The electricity flickered once, twice, and then went out completely, plunging them into darkness broken only by the harsh strobe of lightning. "The generator," Bill said, reaching for the flashlight he'd set ready. "I need to check that it's running." "I'll come with you," Rebecca insisted. "No," Bill said sharply. "Stay with the puppies. I won't be long." Bum! The journey to the barn, normally a 30-second walk, became an ordeal. Rain drove horizontally, stinging Bill's face and soaking him instantly. Wind threatened to knock him from his feet. The beam of his flashlight barely penetrated the sheets of water cascading from the sky. The generator sat in a small shed attached to the barn. Bill reached it, fumbling with cold fingers to check the fuel and ignition. To his relief, it hummed to life on the second try. Emergency lights flickered on in the barn and kennels, casting weak illumination through the storm. As Bill turned to head back to the house, a tremendous crack split the night, a sound he recognized with visceral dread. A tree breaking before he could determine its location. A massive branch crashed through the roof of the nearest kennel, the one housing the relocated hounds. Without thinking, Bill ran toward the kennel, heart pounding. Inside, the dogs barked frantically, unhurt but terrified as rain poured through the shattered roof. The branch had missed them, but had destroyed the kennel door, leaving it hanging by a single hinge. As Bill reached for the damaged door, one of the hounds, a young male with a nervous disposition, bolted past him into the storm. "No!" Bill shouted, but his voice was swallowed by the wind. In the distance, headlights cut through the rain, a vehicle moving slowly along the road that bordered Bill's property to the north. With a sinking feeling, Bill recognized Frank Carter's truck. The escaped hound, confused and frightened, ran toward the headlights. Bill's stomach clenched as he imagined Frank's reaction to a strange dog approaching his truck during a storm. "Faith," Bill called to the remaining dogs, using the command Martha had painstakingly taught each rescue stay. Then he ran after the escaped hound, his bad knee screaming in protest, rain blinding him, wind battering his body. He had to reach the dog before Frank did something unforgivable. Through the curtain of rain, Bill saw the hound reach the road, saw Frank's truck stop abruptly. The driver's door opened. Frank stepped out, something long and dark in his hands. "Frank!" Bill shouted, pushing himself harder. "Don't!" Frank raised the object, a rifle. Bill realized with horror and aimed it at the confused dog now circling his truck. Bill's foot slipped in the mud, sending him crashing to the ground. Pain exploded in his knee. He struggled to rise, to call out again, but the wind tore the words from his throat. The scene before him seemed to unfold in slow motion. Frank sighting down the barrel of his rifle, the hound, sensing danger, turning to flee, a small figure rushing from the passenger side of Frank's truck toward the dog. With shock, Bill recognized Melissa Carter, Frank's daughter, now in her 20s, placing herself between her father's rifle and the frightened hound. "Dad, no!" Her voice carried on the wind. Frank lowered his rifle slightly, yelling something Bill couldn't hear. Melissa knelt, extending her hand to the trembling dog. To Bill's amazement, the hound approached her cautiously, allowing her to grasp its collar. Bill finally reached them, limping heavily, drenched and gasping for breath. "Anderson," Frank acknowledged, his rifle now pointed at the ground but still in his hands. "Frank," Bill panted, "thank you for not shooting my dog." "Wasn't my choice," Frank said, nodding toward his daughter. "Melissa wouldn't have it." The young woman stroked the hound's head, murmuring reassurances. "He's scared, not dangerous," she said, giving her father a pointed look. Thunder crashed directly overhead, making them all flinch. The rain, if possible, intensified. "Get the dog in the truck," Frank ordered his daughter. "We can't stay out in this." Bill stared at him. "You're taking my dog." "I'm getting him out of this storm," Frank clarified gruffly. "You can collect him tomorrow if you can make it up my driveway." Before Bill could respond, another tremendous crack sounded from the direction of his farm. He turned to see a flash of light that wasn't lightning, a brighter, more sustained glow. Fire! The barn! He whispered, horror flooding through him. Despite the torrential rain, lightning had found its mark, just as it had 3 years ago. "Dad!" Rebecca's voice carried faintly through the storm. She was running toward him. A small shape clutched to her chest. Sarah followed close behind. "The puppies!" Bill gasped. "Stella!" "They're safe in the house," Rebecca assured him, reaching his side. "But the barn, Dad, it's burning, and Faith is missing." Faith, the smallest puppy, the one with Liberty's moon marking, the one that had always needed extra care, Bill felt the world tilt beneath him. She was right there in the box. Rebecca continued, voice breaking. "Then the thunder crashed and she just vanished. We've searched everywhere in the house." Bill looked back toward his farm, where flames now visibly licked at the barn despite the downpour. Then he looked at Frank Carter, standing stone-faced in the rain, rifle still in hand. In that moment, with fire once again threatening everything he cared for and a vulnerable creature lost in the storm, Bill Anderson made a choice that would alter everything. "Help me," he said simply to Frank. "Please." And to his eternal surprise, Frank Carter nodded. Thunder split the sky as 4 figures fought their way through the deluge toward the burning barn. Bill led, his injured knee sending spasms of pain up his leg with each step. But adrenaline pushed him forward. Rebecca and Sarah flanked him, with Frank Carter following close behind, his rifle abandoned in his truck, replaced by a powerful flashlight that cut yellow swaths through the rain. "Faith," Bill called repeatedly, though his voice was little match for the storm's fury. "Faith." The barn's eastern side was fully engulfed now, flames licking hungrily at the wooden structure despite the rain. The fire cast an eerie glow over the flooded yard, creating a hellish landscape of rippling water reflecting orange flame. Bill felt a sickening déjà vu, another storm, another fire, another desperate search. "The fire department's on their way," Sarah shouted over the wind. But with the flooding, it could take them half an hour to get here. Half an hour was too long. By then, the barn would be consumed, and if Faith was inside, Bill couldn't complete the thought. "We need to split up," he directed. "Rebecca, check the front kennels again. Sarah, the house one more time. Frank, the perimeter of the property. I'll check the barn." "Dad." "No," Rebecca protested. "It's too dangerous." "I know that barn better than anyone." Bill insisted. "If Faith is in there, I'll find her." Before anyone could argue further, a flash of lightning illuminated the yard, followed almost instantly by a deafening crack of thunder. In that brief moment of brightness, Bill spotted something that made his blood run cold. A tiny form, huddled against the barn's western wall, away from the worst of the flames but dangerously close to the spreading fire. "There!" he shouted, pointing. "By the barn, it's Faith." Without hesitation, Bill splashed across the flooded yard toward the puppy. Rebecca called after him, her words lost in the storm's roar. The closer he got to the barn, the more intense the heat became, pushing back against the night's chill and the rain's cold assault. Faith cowered against the barn wall, her tiny body shivering violently, paralyzed by fear. At just 4 weeks old, she was smaller than Bill's hand, her white fur with its distinctive moon marking now sodden and gray with ash. "It's all right, girl," Bill murmured as he approached slowly, not wanting to startle her into running closer to the flames. "I've got you." Just as his fingers brushed her wet fur, a horrific groaning sound came from above. Bill looked up to see the barn's roof shifting. Weakened by fire and the weight of accumulated water, a section began to collapse, sending burning debris hurtling toward them. Bill lunged forward, scooping Faith against his chest and twisting away from the falling timber. A searing pain struck his shoulder as a flaming board grazed him. He staggered, nearly losing his footing in the mud and flooding, but managed to keep both himself and the puppy from falling. "Bill!" Frank's voice cut through the chaos. The farmer appeared at his side, grabbing his uninjured arm to steady him. "This way." Together, they retreated from the burning structure, Faith trembling violently against Bill's chest. The puppy's breathing came in rapid, shallow pants, and her tiny heart raced beneath Bill's protective fingers. "She's in shock." Bill gasped as they reached the relative safety of the yard where Rebecca and Sarah waited. "And maybe smoke inhalation. Sarah?" The veterinarian took the puppy, her professional demeanor taking over as she quickly assessed the tiny animal. "She needs oxygen and warmth. We need to get her inside now." The four of them struggled through the storm toward the house, Bill leaning heavily on Frank's unexpected support, his injured knee and burned shoulder sending waves of agony through his body. Behind them, the barn crumbled further, surrendering to the fire's appetite. Once inside the kitchen, lit only by emergency lanterns, Sarah worked quickly. She had brought her medical bag from the car and now extracted a small oxygen mask and tank she used for animal emergencies. "Hold her steady," she instructed Rebecca, who cradled the puppy while Sarah administered oxygen. Stella paced anxiously nearby, whining softly. Her other puppies huddled together in their box. Bill collapsed into a kitchen chair, his body finally registering the full extent of his injuries. His shoulder burned where the timber had struck, and his knee had swollen to twice its normal size. Frank Carter stood awkwardly by the door, rainwater pooling around his boots on Martha's clean kitchen floor. His face, normally hard with hostility, now showed something Bill hadn't seen there in years: concern. "You'll need that shoulder looked at," Frank observed gruffly. Bill nodded, his attention fixed on Faith's tiny form. "The puppy first." Long minutes passed as Sarah worked, her fingers gentle but sure as she checked Faith's vitals, administered supplemental oxygen, and wrapped the puppy in warming blankets. The storm continued its assault outside, but inside the kitchen, a fragile bubble of focus formed around the struggling life at its center. "Come on, little one," Sarah murmured. "Fight." Faith's breathing grew more labored. Her eyes, which had been open when Bill found her, now closed, her tiny body limp despite the oxygen and warmth. "She's fading," Sarah said softly, her voice weighted with professional knowledge and personal grief. "The shock, the cold, the smoke. It's too much for such a small body." "No," Bill said, the word torn from him with such force that everyone in the room startled. He pushed himself up from the chair, ignoring the pain screaming through his body, and limped to where Rebecca held the puppy. "Not again. I'm not losing another one to a storm and fire. Not again." He took Faith from Rebecca's hands, cradling the tiny creature against his chest, close to his heart. "You listen to me, Faith," he whispered fiercely. "You were named for a reason. You're stronger than this storm, stronger than this old man who couldn't even take care of himself after Martha died. You don't get to give up. You hear me? We don't give up." The kitchen fell silent, except for the storm's continued rage and Stella's soft whining. Sarah watched with professional concern, her hands hovering near the oxygen mask, still covering the puppy's muzzle. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. Frank looked away, his jaw working silently. Faith lay motionless in Bill's palms, her breathing now so shallow it was barely visible. Bill felt something breaking inside him, the tentative healing that had begun with Stella's arrival fracturing under the weight of impending loss. "Please," he whispered, no longer caring who heard the break in his voice. "Martha, if you're listening, help me save her." And in that moment, as lightning flashed and thunder shook the old farmhouse, Faith stopped breathing entirely. Sarah reached for the puppy, her expression grave. "Bill, I'm so sorry." "No." Bill held Faith closer, refusing to relinquish her. "No, she's a fighter. She's got more to do here." With gentle desperation, he used one finger to massage the puppy's chest, mimicking the cardiac massage he'd seen Martha perform countless times on struggling newborns. "Come back, Faith," he murmured. "Come back to us." But the tiny body remained still. Rebecca placed her hand on her father's arm, tears streaming freely now. "Dad." Faith was gone, just as Liberty had been, just as Martha had been taken by storm and fire. Elements Bill had proven powerless against. Once again, he had failed to protect what he loved most. He looked up, meeting Frank Carter's gaze across the kitchen. In the older man's eyes, Bill saw not triumph or vindication, but a reflection of his own grief, a loss understood, shared. "I lost someone to fire, too," Frank said quietly. "Years ago." The kitchen fell silent, save for the storm's continued assault outside. Frank Carter's words hung in the air, unexpected and heavy with meaning. Bill, still cradling Faith's motionless form, looked up at his neighbor with questions in his eyes. Frank shifted uncomfortably, clearly unaccustomed to vulnerability. "My boy," he finally continued, his voice rough. "Thomas, he was 6 when our barn caught fire. 17 years ago now." "I didn't know you had a son," Rebecca said softly. "Not many do anymore." Frank's weathered face contracted with old pain. "He was playing with matches in the hayloft. By the time I realized—" He trailed off, the memory visibly overwhelming him. Understanding dawned on Bill like a physical weight. 17 years of Frank's bitterness, his hostility toward the sanctuary, his obsession with safety, it all made a terrible sense. Before Bill could respond, a tiny movement against his palm caught his attention. He looked down, hardly daring to hope. "Sarah," he whispered. "I think she moved." The veterinarian was at his side instantly, professional skepticism warring with hope on her face. She placed her stethoscope gently against Faith's chest. "There's a heartbeat," she confirmed after an agonizing moment. "Faint, but it's there." She reached for the oxygen mask, repositioning it over the puppy's tiny muzzle. "Keep her warm. Keep her close." Bill held Faith against his chest, his own heart thundering with relief and fear in equal measure. The puppy's struggle was far from over. But that small flutter of life represented everything: hope, second chances, the possibility of healing, respiratory stimulant. Sarah said, preparing a minuscule dose in a syringe so small it looked like a toy in her hands. With practiced precision, she administered the injection into Faith's thin shoulder. "Now we wait." Frank had moved closer, watching the tiny life battle against impossible odds with an intensity that suggested he was seeing something else entirely, perhaps his own son's struggle, perhaps his own grief, mirrored in Bill's desperation. The fire department. Rebecca remembered suddenly, glancing toward the window where the storm still raged. "They'll never find the driveway in this." "I'll go flag them down at the road," Frank offered immediately, already moving toward the door. "Wait!" Bill called, surprising himself as much as Frank. "The driveway floods at the bend. You won't make it back on foot." Frank paused, hand on the doorknob. "The old logging trail," Bill continued. "It runs along higher ground, connects our properties on the north side. Martha and I used it during the flood of '98. Frank's eyebrows raised slightly. The only indication of his surprise that Bill would share this information, would trust him with it. "I know the trail," he acknowledged with a nod before disappearing into the storm. As the door closed behind Frank, Faith stirred again in Bill's hands, her tiny lungs struggling to draw breath. Each shallow inhalation seemed to cost her tremendous effort. But she was fighting. "That's it," Bill encouraged, his voice a whisper. "You're stronger than this storm." Rebecca moved to stand beside her father, one hand on his shoulder, the other gently stroking Faith's damp fur. "Mom would be so proud of you," she said. And Bill knew she meant both him and the puppy. The minutes stretched interminably. Sarah monitored Faith's vital signs, occasionally adjusting the oxygen flow or warming blankets. Stella lay pressed against Bill's legs, her maternal instinct keeping her close to her struggling puppy. The other 6 puppies had settled back to sleep in their box, unaware of the life and death drama unfolding mere feet away outside. The storm began to subside, its fury gradually giving way to a steady, less violent rainfall. The thunder receded, becoming distant rumbles rather than earth-shaking explosions. In the relative quiet that followed, they heard the fire truck's siren approaching along the flooded road. Faith's breathing grew marginally stronger with each passing minute. Her tiny rib cage expanded more fully, and her heartbeat, though still rapid, gained strength. When she finally opened her eyes, those same intelligent eyes that had marked her dam and all the puppies as special, Bill felt tears escape down his weathered cheeks. "Hello there," he whispered. "Welcome back." Sarah sat back on her heels, professional reserve barely containing her emotion. "She's stabilizing, not out of the woods yet, but fighting." The sound of vehicles splashing through flooded terrain announced the arrival of the fire department. Guided by Frank through the logging trail, red lights pulsed through the kitchen windows, casting surreal shadows across the walls. "I need to direct them," Sarah said, rising. "Rebecca, you know what to watch for. Any signs of distress, call me immediately." She grabbed her raincoat and hurried outside. Bill and Rebecca remained with Faith, monitoring each breath, each tiny movement. The puppy was awake now, but exhausted, her eyes struggling to remain open. "You know what this reminds me of," Rebecca said softly. "That Springer Spaniel Mom found in the drainage ditch, the one the vet said wouldn't make it through the night." "Chester," Bill remembered, a faint smile touching his lips. "Lived another 12 years. Best bird dog I ever trained. Mom sat up all night with him, just like this, refused to accept the vet's prognosis." Rebecca's voice caught. "She always said some dogs come to us needing an extra measure of faith." Faith shifted in Bill's hands, her nose nudging weakly against his palm. He adjusted her oxygen mask, which Sarah had left in place. "I think I understand now," Bill said quietly. "Why Martha never gave up on any of them. It wasn't stubbornness, it was recognition. She saw something in them that others missed." Outside, firefighters shouted to one another as they battled the barn fire. now reduced to smoldering ruins in the rain. The immediate danger had passed, but Bill knew the structure, one of the oldest on the property, was likely beyond saving. The kitchen door opened, and Frank re-entered, soaked anew from his efforts directing the fire trucks. He carried a familiar medical bag. "The vet asked me to bring this in," he said, placing Sarah's secondary supply kit on the table. "She's helping them set up pumps to drain the worst of the flooding." Frank's gaze fell to Faith, still cradled in Bill's hands. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "She's hanging on," Bill told him. Frank nodded, standing awkwardly for a moment before lowering himself into a kitchen chair. "About what I said earlier," he began, voice gruff with discomfort. "About Thomas." "You don't have to explain," Bill assured him. "I think I do." Frank stared at his mud-caked boots. "After we lost him, I couldn't bear to see anything that reminded me of fire, of accidents waiting to happen, your sanctuary, with all those dogs running around. All I could think about was what could go wrong. I understand fear, Frank." Bill shifted Faith to one hand, wincing as pain shot through his injured shoulder. "It's ruled my life for 3 years. The incident with your dog and Melissa. I overreacted." Frank's admission clearly cost him considerable effort. "The dog startled her. But you were right, it never touched her. I just saw danger everywhere after Thomas. Still do." Rebecca, who had been quietly monitoring Faith, spoke up. "Dr. Andrews at the hospital calls that hypervigilance. It's common after trauma." Frank gave a humorless laugh. "Fancy name for being a paranoid old man." "For being a father who couldn't bear another loss," Bill corrected quietly. A moment of understanding passed between the two men adversaries for years, now united by the common ground of grief. "There's something else you should know," Frank said after a long pause, "about the fire at your sanctuary 10 years ago." Bill tensed. Faith clutched protectively closer. "I was there that night," Frank continued, each word seemingly dragged from him. "Not to cause trouble, to warn you. Actually, I'd seen some teenagers hanging around the back of your property, smoking. Thought they might be a danger to the dogs." "You came to warn us?" Rebecca asked incredulously. Frank nodded, shame evident in his downcast eyes. "By the time I got there, the fire had already started. I saw the dogs panicking, trying to escape the kennel. I opened some of the gates, got maybe 4 or 5 out before the smoke got too thick." "You saved those dogs." Bill's voice was barely audible. "Couldn't save my boy," Frank said, the words raw. "Thought maybe—" He shook his head, unable to complete the thought. "But afterward, you never said anything. You let you think I hated your sanctuary," Frank finished. "Easier that way. Couldn't face what I'd lost by not getting there sooner. Couldn't face your gratitude either." Before Bill could respond, Faith stirred in his hands, a small squeaking sound emerging from her throat, the first vocalization since her revival. All attention immediately returned to the puppy, whose eyes were now fully open, regarding them all with that same uncanny intelligence that had marked Stella's entire litter. "Look at that," Frank said softly. "Stubborn little thing, just like her owner." Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Dawn was breaking, golden light beginning to filter through the kitchen windows, illuminating the small miracle in Bill's hands, a tiny life saved, a truth revealed, and perhaps the first fragile bridge across a chasm of misunderstanding that had divided neighbors for years. 6 months later, on a crisp October afternoon, Bill Anderson sat on his newly rebuilt porch, watching the autumn sunlight gild the fields of Willow Creek Farm. Stella lay at his feet, her coat gleaming with health, while Faith, no longer tiny, but still the smallest of her littermates, perched on the arm of his rocking chair, her distinctive moon-shaped marking as clear as ever against her white fur. The sanctuary had been reborn, though different from its previous incarnation. 10 kennels now stood behind the house, rebuilt to modern specifications with the help of community volunteers and a surprisingly generous donation from the Carter Family Trust. The barn was gone, replaced by a simpler structure that served as a rehabilitation center for the most traumatized rescues. A discreet bronze plaque beside the entrance read simply, "Martha's Place, where second chances begin." "Mr. Bill, Mr. Bill." The excited voices of children broke the afternoon quiet as the school bus stopped at the end of the driveway. 4 elementary students raced up the gravel path, backpacks bouncing, faces alight with anticipation. Tuesday afternoons had become Reading to Rescues Day, a program Mrs. Duck Grayson had helped reinstate with enthusiasm from both her students and the school board. Bill smiled as the children approached. 6 months ago, the only visitors to his farm had been Rebecca and, occasionally, Dr. Sarah. Now the sanctuary hummed with life and purpose again. "Hello there," he called, rising carefully from his rocker. His knee still troubled him in damp weather, a reminder of that stormy night, but the pain was manageable. "The dogs are ready for their stories today." The children swarmed around him, chattering about which rescue they wanted to read to first. Bill ushered them toward the visitation area, a sunny, fenced enclosure where the gentlest dogs waited patiently for their young reading partners. Faith trotted alongside, having appointed herself unofficial greeter for all sanctuary visitors. From the corner of his eye, Bill spotted Frank Carter's truck pulling into the driveway. The sight no longer filled him with dread. Since the night of the storm, the two men had forged a careful truce that had gradually evolved into something approaching friendship, or at least mutual respect. Frank emerged from his truck, moving with a rancher's deliberate gait. At 68, he was still strong, though the decades of hard work had left their mark in the stiffness of his movements. He raised a hand in greeting as he approached. "Anderson," he called, the formal address now softened by familiarity. "Got that fencing material you wanted?" "Appreciate it." "Frank." Bill directed the children to their reading stations before turning back to his neighbor. "Coffee's fresh inside if you want some." Frank nodded, following Bill into the farmhouse kitchen. The room had been transformed in recent months, no longer a shrine to Martha's memory, but a living space that honored her while accommodating the present. Her quilts still adorned the walls, but new cookbooks and veterinary manuals shared space with her old ones. A large whiteboard listed the day's tasks and each dog's special needs. As Bill poured coffee into 2 mugs adorned with paw prints, a gift from Rebecca. Frank glanced at the calendar hanging beside the refrigerator. A date was circled in red. "Zoning board's final decision tomorrow?" he observed. Bill nodded, handing Frank his coffee. "Rebecca's taking the afternoon off to come with me." "You nervous?" "Some," Bill admitted. "But we've met every requirement they've thrown at us, even that noise reduction barrier they insisted on." He smiled faintly. "Which, I believe, was your suggestion." Frank shrugged, the hint of a smile playing around his usually stern mouth. "Just being a good neighbor." The changes in Frank had been as remarkable as the transformation of the sanctuary itself. After his confession about the fire 10 years ago, something had shifted between the two men. Frank had been the first to volunteer when rebuilding began, offering both lumber from his own property and the skills he'd developed over decades of maintaining his farm. More surprisingly, he'd spoken eloquently at the first zoning hearing about the sanctuary's value to the community. The sound of a car pulling up announced another arrival. Through the window, Bill saw Rebecca emerging from her sedan, now dressed in colorful scrubs after her shift at the hospital's pediatric ward. Beside her stood a slender young woman with Frank's unmistakable eyes, Melissa Carter, who had become a regular volunteer at the sanctuary since the night of the storm. "Dad," Rebecca called, entering the kitchen with a folder tucked under her arm. "I've got the final paperwork for tomorrow's hearing." She nodded a greeting to Frank. "Mr. Carter." "Rebecca," Frank acknowledged, before turning to his daughter, who had followed Rebecca inside. "Melissa, I thought you had class this afternoon." "Professor canceled," Melissa explained, kneeling to greet Faith, who had trotted in from the porch. "Thought I'd help with the reading program instead." Bill watched as the young woman, now pursuing a degree in veterinary technology, gathered the small dog into her arms. The irony wasn't lost on him. The daughter of the man who had once threatened to shoot any dog that approached his property was now one of the sanctuary's most dedicated volunteers. "I'll need you both to review these statements before tomorrow," Rebecca said, spreading papers across the kitchen table. "Dr. Sarah's already signed hers, and Pastor Mike dropped his off this morning." As they reviewed the documents, Bill felt a wave of gratitude for the community that had rallied around Willow Creek Sanctuary. What had begun as a personal healing journey with one reluctant German shepherd had blossomed into a renewed purpose that extended far beyond himself. Through the kitchen window, he could see the children reading to attentive rescue dogs in the afternoon sun. Beyond them, the rebuilt kennels housed 12 dogs of various breeds, each with their own story of abandonment or abuse, each now on a path to rehabilitation. A new sign marked the entrance to the property: Willow Creek Canine Sanctuary. In memory of Martha Anderson, every dog deserves a second chance. "You know," Frank said, following Bill's gaze, "Martha would be proud of all this." "She would," Bill agreed, "though I think she'd be even more proud of this." He gestured to the unlikely gathering in his kitchen, longtime adversaries now working together. Broken relationships mended, new connections forged. Later that evening, after the visitors had departed and the sanctuary settled into its nighttime routine, Bill sat on the porch once more. Stella dozed at his feet while Faith perched on his lap, her warm weight a comfort against the autumn chill. The western sky blazed with sunset colors, Martha's favorite time of day. Bill stroked Faith's soft fur, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing, the miracle of her survival, a daily reminder that second chances were possible, that life could emerge from the ashes of grief. "We did it, Martha," he whispered to the painted sky. "We're home again." And somewhere in the gentle breeze that stirred the October leaves, in the distant bark of a content dog, in the peaceful beating of Faith's resilient heart, Bill felt his wife's answer, not a haunting from the past, but a blessing for the future he had found the courage to build. Dear friends, in Bill Anderson's journey, perhaps you glimpse reflections of your own, like him. You've weathered storms that threatened to sweep away everything you built. You felt the weight of loss, of loved ones, of purpose, of the future you once imagined. You've stood in the ashes of what was wondering if anything meaningful could grow again. Bill's resistance to Stella entering his life might feel familiar, that protective instinct to guard against new attachments when old wounds still ache. But remember Faith, that tiny puppy with the will to live despite impossible odds. Remember how healing began not when Bill was ready, but when life demanded it of him. Remember how purpose returned through reluctant service, how community reappeared when he opened his door once more. The dogs with markings from the past weren't ghosts haunting Bill. They were reminders that love leaves indelible prints on our hearts. Our greatest chapters may still lie ahead, waiting to be written in the wisdom of our later years. Like Bill, you possess strength you've forgotten, gifts still needed, and the capacity for joy you may have dismissed as lost. Second chances don't always announce themselves. Sometimes they arrive on 4 paws, or through a neighbor's unexpected forgiveness, waiting for us to simply say yes. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.